Okay, my name is Peter Strangis. I work with Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston. I've worked with refugees for over 10 years. I'm currently in the compliance department, so I manage a lot of grants, but I still work pretty closely with the refugee program. So today I'm going to talk about refugee resettlement, a response to global homelessness. So this presentation, I'm hoping, will help you develop an understanding of these key areas: the scale of the world's homelessness crisis, the terms refugee and internally displaced persons, international efforts to assist refugees, what's going on globally to help refugees find a home, and I'm going to talk about the United States Refugee Program and then refugee resettlement in Houston. So we're going to go from the global to the local perspective on this issue that certainly has been seizing a lot of national and international headlines lately. Okay, according to the United Nations, the High Commissioner for Refugees, which is known as UNHCR, 60 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes due to war, conflict, and persecution. So 60 million homeless people across the globe. This is the highest number of displaced persons since World War II. Global homelessness due to violence has increased from 30 million to 60 million in roughly 10 years. And it's funny because I've done presentations like this for a while, and maybe about 4 years ago, this slide used to say 30 million people. And that was the number we've been going with for years. And suddenly it's really exploded in about the last 5 years, I'd say, that the number of displaced persons in the world, homeless people, has gone up by 30 million or 100%. So I would say it's even shorter than 10 years, but that's the official statistic from the United Nations. So just to put this in perspective for everybody, if you took all the displaced persons in the world and created a country, it would be the world's 24th largest country, just homeless people. And so it would be a country population-wise, which would be about the size of South Africa or Italy. So that's like going to Italy and saying, all right, everybody out. So let's define a couple terms here. Defining global homelessness: refugees and internally displaced persons. So what's a refugee? We hear the term refugee, migrant. They're not exactly the same thing. Refugees. 20 million people are refugees, which the United Nations defines as people who have fled conflict and they've crossed an international border to do so. So that's someone who's running away from death or persecution and they've left their country. So if you're from Iraq and you flee to Lebanon, you're a refugee. If you're from Somalia and you flee to Kenya, you're a refugee. 10 million, and I find this is heartbreaking and staggering. 10 million refugees are children. And a lot of these refugees don't have parents, they're orphans. And actually at Catholic Charities, we have a shelter just for orphan refugee children. We have about 50. And they live at a shelter on our property, and then some of them also live in the community in foster homes. Internally displaced persons. 40 million people are internally displaced persons, which we call in the field IDPs. IDPs are defined by the United Nations as individuals who have fled their homes but have not crossed an international border. So if you are in Syria, for example, and you have not fled Syria, but you're fleeing war, you're fleeing ISIS or you're fleeing the Assad regime, but you're still in your country, you're called an IDP. You're homeless, but you're in the state where you grew up, where you have residency. So these are people who have not crossed an international border. Currently, Syria is the world's biggest producer both of refugees. There's 4 million Syrian refugees right now. So that's people who have fled Syria, and most of them have gone to places like Lebanon, Turkey, and then if you've been watching the news, you know a lot of them have taken boats and have gone to Europe and have made their way from Turkey to Greece to Germany, France, Norway, and so on and so on. So they have 4 million refugees from Syria and internally displaced people, 7.6 million. So there's 7.6 million homeless Syrians within Syria's current borders in the Middle East who who are caught up in the conflict and for whatever reason, they're not able to make it out of the country. Afghanistan has 2.5 million and Iraq has 1.4 million refugees. So those are the second biggest source countries. So Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq are where most of the world's refugees are currently coming from today. And this map is a little bit difficult to see, but it shows that from 1991, so for about the last 25 years, where refugees have come from globally. So you see there's refugees from Europe and Kosovo, which that crisis stopped about 20 years ago. Liberia had a refugee crisis back in the 90s. Rwanda had the genocide, which caused 2.3 million refugees to flee abroad, and so on. So right now, when we're talking about the crisis and the type of refugees who come to the United States, right now it's people from the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. So how does the global community respond to this overwhelming refugee or homeless crisis? There is a big international effort that's underway. So working with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the global community, and the major players in working with refugees are countries in Europe, the United States, and Canada. So they provide hundreds of thousands of refugees with a chance at rebuilding their lives, giving them a sense of hope. So this is the process called resettlement. So when you hear people talk about refugee resettlement, that means actually helping refugees find a permanent home, which is always going to be far away from the home they grew up in, sadly. So the map on the right talks a little bit about asylum claims in Europe in 2015. Right now there's a little over 500,000 refugees who are in Europe. Most of those have they fled Syria and Iraq, and they've made their way up into Turkey and then crossing the ocean. Although it's a short distance, it's a very treacherous trip to go to Greece and then work their way through European countries. Most of them have gone on to Germany. So that's why Europe is really struggling right now dealing with this grave humanitarian crisis. The refugees are just flooding the borders and going into these countries and asking for asylum and safety. And Europe right now is trying to figure out a response. That's why there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of turmoil in Europe, because this is an unprecedented wave of migrants who have just come into the country. We don't really have that problem in the United States. And this is sort of where my line of work comes in. This is a little chart here that talks about, in the fiscal year 2015, the government calendar year, we'll just say 2015, the United States has a well-established refugee program. It's been around for 35, 40 years, since the end of the Vietnam War. So the United States has had a lot of time to develop a system and an infrastructure to handle refugees and to provide them with a new home. So while Europe is just struggling and kind of figuring out as they go along, what do we do with 500,000 people? The United States has a very organized program, and every year the United States picks and chooses which refugees it wants to bring to the United States. And that basically is, I think it's around 60,000 from 2015, but the United States says we're going to take 17,000 from Africa, mainly from Somalia and Congo. East Asia will take 13,000. Latin America and the Caribbean, 4,000. A lot of those are Cubans and Colombians. Near East and South Asia, 33,000. That's really talking about refugees from Afghanistan and Iraq. So everything's set up ahead of time. It's an organized system. And I'll be talking a little bit about that system right now. So this is how a refugee gets from a camp, or if they're living in a city somewhere. I think about half of refugees actually live in cities. There's the notion that they all live in camps. Well, that's not true. A lot of Syrians, for instance, live in Beirut, Lebanon, and are just waiting for a chance to come to the United States. So in refugee camps in cities throughout the world, United Nations staff work with refugees. They're advocates for refugees, and they help refugees apply to the United States refugee program. So I'm a refugee and I say, I really want to go to the United States. I go to a UN office or a designated tent in a refugee camp and I say, what do I have to do to go to the United States? The United Nations helps them prepare their application and build their case. Then the United Nations makes a referral to the US government. So staff from the US Department of Homeland Security, our immigration office, federal immigration office, they actually travel to refugee camps. Or they'll go to cities where refugees are, and they'll interview refugees to determine if they meet the United Nations definition of what a refugee is. Then they decide if the applicant's claim of persecution is actually credible. So it's a pretty long process. Like, I don't know any of you who have applied for a green card. You go into the immigration office, officer sits down with you, you give them the application, they ask you a bunch of questions and see if they want to provide you with permanent residency. Every refugee goes through that same process. They have to prove to the government that, have to say, hey look, if you send me home to Africa or if you send me back to the Middle East, I'm a dead man. So they have to prove that, and often they have to provide paperwork and some real hard evidence that if they're sent home, then if they're sent home from the place where they're staying, then they're in big trouble. So if the United States government, Homeland Security, believes a refugee that they have a legitimate claim, they give them refugee status. And before coming to the United States, once a refugee has been approved, they have to go through extensive background checks and medical exams. And these often take years to complete. We've had situations, particularly with refugees from Iraq and Afghanistan that I've worked with, who they're waiting for so long to go through their background check that their health exam expires. Because they also want to make sure refugees coming to the United States are healthy. So their health exam expires, then they have to go get another health exam. That takes forever to do. Their background check expires. They go through another one. So you hear a lot of things in the news that, well, refugees come over here and we don't know if they're terrorists or we don't know if they're criminals. Well, we do. Because refugees aren't allowed in this country, and it's not a perfect system, but it's 99.9999% perfect because refugees go through the highest security screenings of any immigrants coming to the United States. Just a couple quick facts about refugees, and there's a myth that refugees are undocumented. That's not true either. Refugees are authorized to work from the moment they arrive on American soil. They're eligible for the green card after 1 year in the United States, and they're eligible for citizenship after 5 years. So refugees, basically, they land at the airport. We could literally take them for a job interview the second they arrive, but have to wait a couple weeks for them to get their documents from immigration, proving that they have authorization to work. And it's logical, if you think about it, why a refugee would get permanent residency after a year, because this is their new home and there's no going back. So refugees, sometimes they say, I need to go back to Iraq or Afghanistan to take care of a family matter, and they take their life in their own hands often when they leave. So we strongly discourage refugees from going home again. It's a sad thing to have to tell someone, but we put their security first, and we want to make sure they're making very safe choices. And then most refugees become Americans after 5 years. Each year, the number and nationalities of refugee arrivals to the United States is determined by US Congress and the President. So Obama and Congress kind of hammer out a deal on how many refugees they'll take each year to the United States. Again, very different from Europe, where people just show up in boats and trains or on foot. We are selecting who's coming here as a refugee. Normally, it's about 60 to 70,000 refugees a year come to the United States. In 2016, the US plans to resettle 80,000 refugees. And the number may actually reach 100,000 by 2017, which will be the highest number ever. And that has a lot to do with the crisis in the Middle East and Syria. The United States making its humanitarian commitment to bringing in more refugees. So I've been in this business for quite some time, never seen numbers like this. In 2015, the US resettled 69,933. So about, 27 away from resettling 70,000. I don't know why they couldn't just let 30 more people come in, but they didn't. This amounts to 70% of all refugees who are receiving assistance from the United Nations, who are trying to get to a country somewhere in the world. 7 out of 10 end up coming to the United States. Those are people that the United Nations is actively helping. Although all 50 states accept some refugees, Texas has been resettling the most of all 50 states since 2010. So if you're wondering what part of the world resettles the most refugees, well, it's your own backyard. It's Texas. And real quick, here's just a breakdown of refugee arrivals by states for the last 5 years. As you can see, Texas is number 1, followed by California, and then New York. And one of the reasons so many refugees are coming to Texas is because of the economy. Because our major job is to get refugees jobs. So they have to go to a part of the United States where they can get jobs. And that part is Texas. Okay, 6,600 refugees resettled in Texas in 2015. So this year, the year that just ended, 6,000. This represents 10% of all refugees that came to the United States came to the Lone Star State. Of those, 1,800, almost 2,000, arrived in the Houston area. So 3% of all refugees come to the United States come to our city and are resettled primarily in Harris County, Southwest Houston to be even a little more precise. So Houston is currently America's #1 destination for refugees in the United States, which makes Houston one of the biggest resettlers of refugees in the world. Catholic Charities, where I work, we're one of 5 refugee agencies in the Houston area. And like the other agencies in Houston and also throughout the United States, whether you're in Des Moines, Iowa, or Anchorage, Alaska, or even Honolulu, Hawaii, we pretty much have the same contracts with the federal government, in particular with the US State Department. So we provide basically the same services. To be a successful refugee agency, the government expects us to meet the immediate basic needs of refugees. A lot of what we do is once they arrive, make sure their medical, food, housing needs are all met. We provide them with clothing. If it's 30 degrees when refugees arrive at Hobby Airport or just down the street at Intercontinental, the government requires us to have winter coats for them. If it's 150 degrees when they arrive, we're required to have summer clothes for them. So the government tells us specifically what kind of services we're supposed to provide them. And beyond that, the government expects us to place 85% of all adults 18 to, I believe, 60-something to 64, they have to get jobs. Doesn't matter what your background is. Doesn't matter if you've never been able to hold a pencil, if you've never held a pencil in your life and you don't know how to write. Doesn't matter if you have a PhD from London School of Economics, and we have refugees with PhDs from London School of Economics. You have to take the first appropriate job that's offered to you. If that's working in a factory or if it's working in a hotel, then that's how it is, because our assistance for refugees, financial assistance, cuts off after 6 months. So we're under a lot of pressure to work with families to get them jobs as soon as possible. Refugees have a contractual relationship with our agency, but by extension with the federal government. We are essentially government contractors. So if a refugee doesn't want to go to work, he says, no, I think I'll go to college instead. Well, we have to sit down and have a tough talk with them saying, well, listen, you were displaced and homeless once before. The issue is, if you don't accept a job, then we're going to stop giving you cash assistance, and we can actually stop paying the rent for a couple months. So it's called sanctioning. So we try to work out arrangements with clients, but just to let you know that When refugees come over here, very little is just given to them. Most refugees receive, on average, $2,500 worth of assistance. That's it. And that's supposed to last them 6 months. And then they're on their own. They have to pay their own bills, and they have to be working so they don't become homeless again. And that's a really horrible thing, and frankly, it almost never happens where a refugee becomes homeless. But that's a tragedy to me, that people have gone from homelessness to homelessness when our job is to provide them with security and help them keep a roof over their head. Okay, so very quickly, some numbers for Catholic Charities. Don't have too much time left. We resettled 736 refugees in 2015. So 1%, that doesn't seem like a big number, but when you look at the global crisis that refugee resettlement is, and there are 60 million people displaced around the world, 1% is a lot of people. So 1% of all refugees who came to the United States in 2015 came to the place I work, Catholic Charities. And so that makes 11% of all refugees that came to Texas, came to Houston. They generally go to other big cities, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio. Smaller numbers go to Austin. But in Texas, it's really Houston and Dallas compete for to be the biggest resettler of refugees every year. Most refugees came from Iraq, Syria, Burma, Congo, and Somalia. We also served 1,500 Cuban entrants, or border crossers. This will be a whole nother presentation onto itself, but Cuban refugees are, even if they're coming here for economic reasons, which would make someone a migrant and not a refugee, if a Cuban can step foot on American soil, they get asylum instantly. So if you're following the news, you know that Cuba and the United States, our relations are warming up quite a bit. Cubans are afraid that if I don't get to the United States now, I won't get refugee status. Then I'll have to apply to come as an immigrant, which is really, really hard to do. So there's 10, 15, 20,000 Cubans who are coming up through Mexico, crossing the border into Texas. And they're literally homeless when they get here. And we often will have 20 or 30 will show up on a Friday afternoon with a suitcase or a backpack, and they have no place to stay. So they come right from the bus station, which is down the street from our office. And sometimes I'll be, walking out to my car at the end of the day, and you see a bunch of people walking down the street with suitcases, and I'm like, oh boy. So we have to rush to find them housing, or hopefully they can crash on someone's sofa for a little while. So they meet the standard definition of homelessness too when they arrive here, meaning they don't have a permanent address of their own. So we work on getting them assistance because they're eligible for refugee services as well. I just wanted to touch on that because 1,500 is a staggering number, and there's more and more coming. And some people are saying we could get 50,000 Cubans crossing the border over the next year simply because they're trying to get to the United States while immigration policies are most favorable towards Cubans. Okay, we placed 822 refugees in jobs, new refugees and returning clients. And as I mentioned before, that's the heart of what we do. We provided services to 1,500 clients per month, including new and returning clients. Okay, so I'm done? Is that 2 minutes? Okay, perfect, yeah. All right, so as you can see, it's a pretty big operation what we do, and it just speaks to, it's kind of a local example of really what's going on in the world. And by all means, I encourage you guys to talk to me afterwards if you're ever interested in volunteering with refugees or find out about alternative spring break here, because Lone Star is partnering with Catholic Charities. And my last slide is, I think this kind of summarizes both the problem and the solution to refugee resettlement. And I actually did a cartoon myself that looked a lot like this, but this one's way better, so my hats are off to this cartoonist. But to me, it's just really, it captures everything, the problem and the solution. The problem, where are you from? And refugees are saying from Earth. So the difference is, how do we get a sense of ourselves? Is it by excluding other people because they are, they have racially, ethnically, religiously different than us? Or are we seeing all of ourselves as human beings? And the fact that when people exclude others from belonging in a community, that leads to war and violence and refugee crises. And also the solution is, yeah, we're all from planet Earth, right? So it's a humanitarian issue. As you can see, the global scale of homelessness is so big that it really is a partnership between all nations who can somehow, in some way, afford to help refugees, because the United States can't do it alone. Norway and Finland and Sweden and Germany can't do it alone. It's really a multinational effort to fix a multinational problem. And that's just dealing with the people who are displaced by war, not even touching on how do you fix the actual conflicts in these regions where refugees are coming from. Okay, well, that is it for me. So if you're interested in talking a little bit more, I'll stick around for a couple minutes and be happy to talk to anyone who'd like to.
I work for Family Promise of Lake Houston, and we're a local self-sufficiency program right here in our little neighborhood. We call ourselves a self-sufficiency program because our goal is to actually get people to the point where they're on their own, that they don't have to depend on a whole lot of stuff besides themselves to be able to function and survive in our community. So we're not like a typical homeless shelter. We do take homeless families with children. That's our main demographic here in the community. But it's definitely a journey. A lot of people, I come out here a lot. I do your guys' human library here, and I love it. I love coming out to talk to this group, and I thank Daniel for having me out and everything. But a lot of people have come up to me and they've expressed that homelessness, their definition of homelessness or how people got homeless was somebody who refuses to work, or they want to be that way, or they were just really not a nice person at home, so somebody kicked them out, something that they've done. But I got a couple questions for you guys. How many people here think that they make pretty good choices? There's a whole room full of people. Y'all are in college. I'm sure a lot of you think you made really good choices. And you guys wake up every morning, you make sure that you get to school. It doesn't matter if you've showered, nobody cares. But you get there, you think you make really good choices, at least something that gets you through your day. A lot of people think that. A lot of people a lot of adults, especially when they become parents. I love meeting single parents. They're like, I'm a parent now, I know everything. Until they're calling their mom or us. Just imagine just being who you are. You get into a situation, say like a relationship, or you hit a hard, tough time in your life, and your best friends are all around you and they're rallying you and everything, and you hit a tough time. You got laid off from a job, or you're not working, or you flunked a class or something, or however life works out for you. So you decide that you're just gonna go travel somewhere. A lot of people do that. You just get in your car and you just go because you got that kind of freedom. And you say you get somewhere and you're staying at somebody's house, you're all camping out, couch surfing, college, I had a lot of college friends sleeping on my couch. But you're there, and say you and that group get into a fight, or you and this relationship get into a fight. That person gets in their car, and they take off. They're gone. Your purse was in there, your wallet was in there, and they're gone. Your cell phone was in there, you're gone. And you're where you are, and you've got nothing to prove who you are. You just became homeless. Take a minute to try to imagine doing that with 4 kids. That's exactly what happened. I have 4 children. My oldest at the time was 9 years old, and my youngest was 2. And their dad, who I'd been married to for about 10 years, he had lost a job, so we decided we were gonna go and travel and see his family, and we stopped at one of my friend's house just because it was on the way to somewhere where we were going. And while we were there, he just took off. I had 4 children, no birth certificates, no ID, no cell phone, nothing in a city where I knew one person, and that's the person we were staying with. It took a long time to get back to just even prove who I was. I couldn't go down and apply for food stamps or Medicaid or anything. I couldn't even go down to like Starbucks Nothing. I didn't have any money. My debit card was gone, and I had a 2-year-old. That's diapers and milk, and I had nothing. I didn't have my phone, and I'm just like typical people. My parents had just moved, so they changed their phone number. How many people know phone numbers by heart, or you just look at your phone like I do? Yeah, my phone was in the car, so trying to call somebody was really hard. The only phone number that I had memorized was the phone number for Family Promise, because I had volunteered for them so much and I had worked with them. That's the only phone number I had memorized. So I call and Carol answers the phone and she's like, well, get back here. The only thing is though, is that I went from Texas and I was in Kansas. I'm from Colorado. Kansas is scary. There's no mountains or anything. So, she's like, well, get back here. I have no car. I have no way to do anything. And she goes, okay, when you get back here, I'll take you into my program. I was scared to death because now here I am. I'm really homeless and I have 4 kids. I don't have an identity. I have nothing. And no way to get anywhere. So we did. It was just by the grace of really good friends, and I am a Christian, so, God did play a part in it. But we couch surfed and we hopped from place to place. We went to 6 different states in a total of 12 months, trying to be able to become people again. And we got put in some really scary situations. When you live with other people, especially when you have kids, they automatically think, well, you're homeless, so you are an irresponsible parent. I had people trying to parent my kids. I had people just telling me I was a horrible person and that I had just messed up. But the truth of the matter is I didn't ask for any of that. Life was going pretty good. Life was just a decent thing. And it happened even just to me. We made our way back to Family Promise. We spent 9 months in Family Promise, and my family has not been homeless since. The way Family Promise works is when families come in to our program, they usually have nowhere to go. They don't, some of them have an identity and some don't. So when they first come in, they get, we work on getting IDs, we work on getting just the basic needs for what they need. They get to stay between 90 to 120 days. We don't take any government funding, so that means that if we get a mom in, like in my case, where it takes a really long time to get things, they can get the help that they need, and we can take the time that they need to be able to achieve that. What do you guys think that the average age of homelessness is? That means if you took all the homeless people, added up all their ages, what's the average of that? Any guesses? What? Young. Yeah, it is pretty young. The actual age of, the average age of homelessness is 9. So there are more homeless children in the United States. Obviously, we learned from the refugee presentation that it's all over the world. In 2009, 972 children were registered with Humble ISD as homeless. That's the kids that had the parents that were brave enough to go to the counselor and say, we're living in a hotel, we're living on grandma's couch, we're sleeping in the back of a car. Those were the people that were brave enough to do it. And that's just registered students. They're between then and now, between 933 and almost 1,100 families have registered with the district as homeless. And that's just, like I said, the people that are brave enough to go forward. I can't imagine how many other students there are because you don't see a lot of homeless families. I see them sitting at Target all the time in Atascocita. I see them sitting at different places. And that's not usually the picture. Probably 95% of the time, a homeless family, they won't show that they're homeless. My kids showed up in clean clothes every day. They showed up showered. They showed up with their pencils and their backpacks and their papers just like every other kid. And one of my favorite stories that I like to tell people, especially when I come to the Human Library, is my kids got sponsored for Christmas. And I had been blessed while I was in the program to be able to do some volunteer hours for a doctor. because I was a medical assistant, and since I hadn't worked in a while, they don't just hire you. You have to go do something to get them to hire you. So he offered to train me for free. So here I am, my kids get sponsored for Christmas. I get to go down to Walmart and stand in line with 300 other people. And I'm in scrubs that somebody else paid for, and my kids are all, in their clothes because they just got home from school. And I'm standing in line, and there's a lady that's behind me. And, scrubs are like pajamas, but, everybody just associates them with some kind of medical professional. And the lady behind me, she's going, well, why is she even here? She has a really good job. I don't know why she's doing this. And in my brain, it took everything I had not to turn around and be like, lady, I'm homeless. I'm working for free because I can't do it. They won't even hire me. I had turned my resume into probably 2,000 people before this doctor said, hey, you know what? Okay, I'll have pity on you and I'll let you work for free so you can get trained again. And it baffled me at what people honestly think that looks like. It's so important not to judge people by what they look like or what you think is going on, because you really just don't know. Family Promise does. They offer a lot of stuff. I went through for 9 months, and they liked me so much they kept me. So I've been working for 4 years. I do their budgeting classes now, and Carol and I have been working together for, obviously 4 years now. We've been together for almost 5 years, and we've started doing out-of-network help. So we actually have 2 students that go here, that come to our shelter every week to get their budgeting classes, to get life skills classes, for us to sit down and teach, help them to figure out what kind of job they want to do. And we do that with all kinds of people in the neighborhood. If they can qualify to come into our program, meaning they're willing to put forth the effort to work, we'll take them and we'll help them. But the demographic that we keep inside of our shelter is families. And our families I love to see our families work. They're amazing. They get up at 6 o'clock or before every day. They come back to our day center, they take showers, they do their laundry, they get their kids to school, they get everything done before I get in at 9 o'clock. So, and then during the daytime, they take their classes, they're working on the computer longer than I do, and I'm the administrative assistant. So, but they're filling out job applications, they're pounding the pavement, they're doing everything they need to do. And sometimes they don't even get to go to bed at night until like 9 o'clock. Because at 5 o'clock, they all get together. We take 3 families at a time. They get together and they drive to one of our host churches. We have 13 churches that host our families, and that means 4 times a year, a church will take 3 bedrooms or 3 rooms out of their church. They prepare them like bedrooms, so families have their own room. They get privacy. They have some dignity. It's a good thing. They all get beds. There's desks and nightstands and lamps and all kinds of really cool stuff. They get to this church. They have dinner home style, like if you guys were going to somebody's house. The meal is prepared for them. They help clean up. They help do their own things, and then they can go to bed. But they get up every day and do it all over again. And they do this. They go to a different church each week. And when they finally do graduate from the program, they get a big party, and I get to order cake, which is my favorite thing to do because they share with me. But once they graduate, we actually follow our families for 2 years. So for 2 years, we make sure that if dad gets laid off from a job or mom gets hurt or something happens to where they're not able to sustain their lifestyle, we kick into overdrive. We're like, okay, well, let's get your resume, we get this going and show them how to, and not really show them, we just kind of point them in the right direction to be able to do what they need to get back on their feet, because they learned all the problem solving skills while they were in the program, but sometimes it takes until the rubber hits the road for them to be able to say, hey, you know what, I did learn that, I figured that out. And because we do what we do, we have an 85% success rate. After that 2 years, 85% of our families are still self-sufficient. They're still living in their own places. And a lot of them come back to Family Promise to volunteer. So there are a lot of volunteer opportunities at Family Promise, especially for college students. You guys can come in and tutor. There's different projects that we do throughout the year. I love when college students come at Christmas time and bake cookies and read books for our kids. So pretty much if you can think it, we can make it happen. So Thanks. I really appreciate. I don't know if
Well, question and answer time. If you guys have any questions for Dana or for Peter, they'd be happy to answer them. I think we got some microphones. Back there, she'll run around and put a mic in your face and you can ask your question.
Sure.
Don't everyone jump at once.
I was going to say, sorry, I don't have another joke tonight.
My question is for Peter. You were saying that if a refugee doesn't want to work, they become homeless?
No, maybe I didn't explain it very well. They don't. I mean, what we do is we have support services, and we do everything we can to prevent that. And really, I can only think of maybe one time in 10 years it's happened, and that was someone who was schizophrenic. So, but yeah, no, what we do is we have support services. We may not give people money after 6 months, but what we do is we can provide services up to 5 years until they become a citizen. So a refugee, if they get a job and they lose a job, they come back to us, we can help them find another job. We can refer them to counselors. We have licensed social workers on staff. So we have really a whole continuum of wraparound services that we provide to prevent that, because the understanding is that's the real narrow window of opportunity to get someone a job who, like I was saying, has never held a pencil before. We have refugees who have never used running water before. And suddenly they need to be doing an assembly line job somewhere. So it's a really steep learning curve, and it's a tough one. So we have built-in programs that the government also provides just to prevent this kind of situation. So my apologies if that wasn't very clear.
Why is it on the news we hear that refugees easily get admitted to this country if there's such a detailed process that they have to go through?
Well, I think first of all, it kind of depends on what media outlet we're watching. That I think a lot of that is very political. And honestly, I mean, I heard it the other day, I don't know where it was, maybe NPR or something, talking about becoming a refugee in the United States is, well, your chances are a little bit better than winning Powerball, but it's a lottery, really. And you strike it rich if you're able to actually get in the system. And for every refugee who's admitted to the United States, there are millions who aren't. So I think that is just, there's a lot of myths and really false information surrounding refugee resettlement. And also, a lot of times lately, there's an assumption that the way things are being handled in Europe, and I commend Europe for taking in 500,000 refugees in 10 months or whatever it's been, so they're naturally going to have problems, but the truth of the matter is it's a very structured system, and that part of it, the real kind of dry stuff about background checks and health physicals and waiting in line to get in and how the whole process works, that's boring stuff, and that doesn't make headlines, but ultimately that's the reality. And I don't blame people for being maybe a little scared or nervous about refugees, because not everyone knows all this stuff, because it's kind of it's what we do, and it's just kind of it's part of it's the professional information that we deal with. It's just not really common knowledge, so I think a lot of it is just misinformation and some ignorance, like by, you know, they can say it, some of our politicians about what's going on.
That's pretty good.
So if the average age for a homeless person is 9, why don't we hear more about the children who are homeless or have opportunities to help those children?
Well, privacy laws keep the schools here. A lot of privacy laws keep the schools from going to the newspaper and saying, oh my gosh, we had 400 homeless kids this year. And frankly, most parents, like I said, it takes the parent being brave enough to go talk to the counselor, to be able to actually get the help they need, because there's a lot of help. Since the age of the average age of homelessness is 9, there's something called the McKinney Veto Act, which states that any child that becomes homeless inside of a district becomes that district's responsibility to bus to school. So can you imagine going to your community and saying, hey, we spent like $25,000 shipping homeless kids to school? There's not a lot of compassion towards that, because they see that that's money from their taxpayer dollars to do that. And a lot of people don't see, yes, they see children homelessness, but it's different here in America than it is in foreign countries for like refugees and immigrants, because a lot of refugees are kids and they don't have parents. Here it's, okay, well, why aren't the parents working? They're being slack parents, they're being lazy, they're being something. And a lot of the families that we see, honestly, we had a gentleman and his wife come in. We do take single men with parents and married couples. He had worked a really good job. He got really sick because he got staph at work and he was in the hospital for a month. Mom went to work, but she wasn't making near the kind of money that he was. So it wasn't about laziness or not wanting to go get a job or not wanting to just pay the bills or anything. Stuff just happened. And I don't think we hear about kids as much, because a lot of people just, because of the news outlets, think that homeless kids don't happen in America. So yeah.
Protect them, really.
Yeah, you want to be here. You take that. It's still on
So
though.
I might have missed this, but what are the policies as strict for children that are refugees that make it when they bring here? Or they,
I'm sorry, I
I
didn't hear
said
that.
I might have missed it in the presentation, but as far as the children that come here as refugees, are those policies set the same for them?
Well, it's a little bit different, and there are some nuances, because refugee children, some of them have parents, but a lot of them don't, and they travel with biological relatives. Others who are orphans, they actually, the United Nations will interview them and say, would you like to be a part of the unaccompanied refugee minor program? Kids will make a decision to join the program, and actually when they come over here, Catholic Charities becomes their legal guardian. So we're actually the parents of these kids. So, but more or less the understanding is if a child from Somalia is in a refugee camp, he can't go home. And he's an orphan, so they're considered even doubly vulnerable, much more vulnerable than like an 18-year-old male in a refugee camp. So there's an emphasis on bringing these kids over and putting them in the foster care system.
Sorry, I know that students have class to get to, and we held them a little bit late, so that I know that Exodus was motivated by wanting to get to class in time. So I think we're going to wrap up, but please give our speakers a